Hey guys, welcome to the EOF Implementers Call number 17. It's been about a month since we've had a chance to chat, so looking forward to hearing what you guys are up to. Maybe we can get started with some client updates from everyone.
Sure, Besu, I'll go ahead and start. We still don't have Create 3 written. I've been focusing on other more foundational tasks that I think are going to be helpful for the EOF process. Besu can now run the execution client specs. It can also through the T8N and B11R tool. And there's also a Graal compiled version of Besu that is able to run the retest F tests at the same speed as the other clients. Because there's, with Java, there's a lot of startup issues. A Graal VM compiled version also gets rid of that startup burden. So that increases the number of clients that can be used in reference test generation. I think EVM1 has also added some of that. So I think this is, some foundational steps to get us to start writing reference testing and start doing cross-client validation tests. Create 3 is just, I just got to spend a day, fine combing through the spec and making sure that I do all the steps right and applying all the other existing reference tests that sit in the there's some reference tests they're a little bit out of date that are in some of the PRs. We've got everything renumbered as well inside of Besu 2. And this is all in, it's not in the mainline Besu yet, it's in a branch. It's in the Mega EOF branch on Hyperledger Besu repo. So those are the updates for Besu.
Cool, thanks, Danno. Who else? Iman?
From Nethermind side, we were focusing mostly on Cancun. By the way, can you hear me, guys?
Loud and clear.
Good. We were focusing more on Cancun EIPs, and for EOF, we just did some cleaning up and matching correctly the spec, fixing some bugs. And we are planning on starting on implementing T8N this week, by the end of this week. So hopefully, after a week or so, we will be also able to generate reference tests. And yeah, that's mostly it from our side.
Awesome. Do you also need to implement B11R? Have you looked at that?
Not yet, but we'll do it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think for retest ETH, you only need to implement T8N, but to use the execution spec tests, you need also B11R. Cool. Yeah, Paul.
So in EVM1, we mostly, like, what is worth noting is we did change the opcodes following the suggestion for Cancun and others. So like all of that has been reworked, and and we are working on updating existing tests to respect this change opcodes, and Hugo is working on this, and I think there are 2 pull requests for Ethereum/tests that does this. And I think in terms of implementation, Andrzej is working on Create 3 and all the different edge cases. So maybe he wants to do the update, but I think that's more or less overview of the changes.
Sweet. Did you want to mention anything about that, Andre?
Not much to add, actually. I think Create 3 implementation is finished now in the VM1. One small final problem that I fixed was there was a charge for hashing of input data applied by mistake, because originally it was in the spec, but then we removed it from the spec, but this charge still remained, and it also remained in the spec, so I removed it from there too. Now it's fixed. Yeah.
Cool. Any other client related updates? any compiler related updates?
Hey, Charles from Viper. So I think I brought up a couple meetings, maybe 2 or 3 meetings ago, about the code size issue from stack validation, and it's a little bit tricky to reason about, but because of the stack validation issues, you can't, or it's not an issue, but yeah, because of the stack validation in the spec, you can't really share code as well as you used to. Anyway, so we're seeing kind of code size increases from 1 to 5%, depending on different kinds of things you can try to do to alleviate it. But I'm trying to, well, I'm wondering if like we can relax the stack validation rules. Yes. Sure.
Yeah, Paul.
And then another thing I wanted to bring up, which isn't as big, but I think would be useful, is I think immediates pointing to code locations should have a variable length encoding, because a lot of the time the jump is going to be to some place that's fairly close. So if we can save a byte or two on every jump, that would be really good. And I was talking about the stack validation thing with Greg for a little while last time, and I'm not convinced that you need the stack invariant rule in order to write a compiler for EOF code.
Yeah, thanks for feedback.
Yeah. Oh,
so
sorry. One more thing.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe you finish first.
Yeah. I was also comparing the code sections versus EIP 2315, and I think that maybe having code sections is not necessary and kind of makes some optimizations more difficult.
Yeah, so about this stack height. So I remember about the issue, and I kind of planned to at least start working on this. So what I mean by working is to just describe the problem and give some examples that doesn't work, but they could work. I mean, I kind of have impression this is somehow fixable, and we discussed that with Solidity some time ago, and yeah, so it's kind of matter to finding time from my side to finally do it. But I don't have final solution and cannot promise we'll find one. But it's a bit like algorithmic problem to solve. So how to specify it in a way that we'll still be able to work with this. And yeah, so if you have ideas how to exactly
I do.
formulate the rule.
I think it's kind of like the difference between, because you can have recursion with calls, right? You can have like tail recursion. So like a loop should in principle not be any different from tail recursion. So you should be able to like basically do the opposite of tail recursion, which is like when you see some instruction which can have multiple entry points which result in different stack heights, you just like kind of outline that basic block. And then you would like on the back end you would have to issue like a call instead of a jump, which like gives you a return PC or something, which is not as good as a jump, but it's not that bad either.
yeah, I'm not sure I can like process this on the fly, but I will try to make it maybe for before the next call, definitely, to like formulate the current status, like what the problem is and how people imagine changing the spec a bit to kind of accumulate for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think ideally we can, I mean, I can talk about it with you offline on Discord or something, but I think ideally we can just drop the stack validation requirement entirely and maybe make those code sections a little bit more expensive. If the backend is required to outline some piece of code, so that it requires a call instead of a jump.
Okay, let's talk after then.
Yeah, I'll send you.
And about like variadic encoding, I don't know, we kind of considered that a long time ago. I think the simplicity has won, but I don't know, maybe others have comments about it.
I think variable length encoding is not that complicated. Like, it's not as simple, obviously, as all location encoding is being static, but it's easy to understand. Like, kind of everybody gets it, and I think you would see a pretty significant code size savings. So I think it's worth it.
Did you have a couple other things there, Charles? Or was that most of your questions?
I think the last thing was about needing code sections. I think that you could have just as good code generation, or better, if you had one global code section instead of multiple code sections, or one code section for 17%, so to speak.
Do you guys have thoughts on that?
If it works better with one global code section, what can't that just be a compiler preference as to how they go about it? Do we need to remove code sections?
Yes, because callf only works with code sections. You can't use call sub to. It's like callf versus call sub, and the difference is that callf goes to a different code section, whereas call sub would be with the global code section, and it would jump to some instruction with the return PC on the call stack. And I'm distinguishing the call stack from the operand stack. I also want to address what Andre is saying, is that you can use jumpf to not change the call stack, but what that doesn't include is that it doesn't work with rjumpi. So like if you have a conditional jump to some code section that you want to share, you can't do that. You have to branch around a callf or a jumpf instruction, so it's an overhead of several bytes and a couple instructions. Basically, you have to like do an is0 and then jump around the callf or jumpf instruction. It's not just an implementation problem, it's a spec problem because of the jump-on issue that I just brought up.
Can you write these out with examples so we can reason more closely about it with concrete examples?
Sure. Do you want me to write them out in the chat?
In Discord.
Yeah, I think they're also in the Discord history, but I can write them out again.
or just bump your post.
I'll do that after the call. I have to actually leave in about 10 minutes.
Thanks. Okay, that was kind of compiler and spec related things. Any other, I guess we can just move on to spec related updates and questions at this point. Anyone have anything on that topic? Hey, Zane.
Hey, just a quick question about the spec. So I think I guess I'll be a small representative for the on-chainers or the consumers or the dApp builders. So we're put together a small working group with like art blocks and NounSTAO and everyone chainers. And we're kind of going through yeah, we kind of gone through the spec and we're trying to figure out what should be the game plan for the EOF changes. And so we put together about a couple of proposals, and Danno, I know you commented on it. And so what we wanted to do is to start testing this out. Part of the concern is that looking around at the other people that are consuming things, we noticed that like token bound accounts, I think, is also using Xcode copy. And so that's gaining a lot of steam within sort of just the NFT ecosystem. And so they're using that as a sort of minimal proxy to like create new sort of derivative contracts that are like smart contract accounts. So it just seems like it would be good to be able to put together a test harness, or just to know whether or not X data copy is going to be a thing, or if we should sort of take on board Danno's suggestion, and then how should we test it? So that's like quite a few little questions in there. So what should we do, or like when will we know what's supported? There you go.
I guess I can make like a quick comment that if this is going to happen for Prague, that would be sometime mid next year, most likely. And we would probably have a good idea that that's going to happen by this fall. The exact specifics, I think things are settling for the spec. So depending on, what the likelihood of EOF going into Prague is, you can sort of use that as a guide. If you have like specific issues, I think it's a good time to like raise them. Like if people are using X data copy or Xcode copy, then this is a good time to have the discussion about what's the right way for people to achieve the same functionality.
Yeah, that makes sense. I linked it in the Discord, what may be the sort of hidden broader implication. And I can link it in the chat real quick if I can find it. But that's it. And so it's looking like next year sometime.
I would guess Prague would be sometime in next year, because Cancun we're targeting for this fall. If you usually add 6 to 8 months after the fork, that's kind of a rough estimate for when the next one might be.
Okay, so none of the Xcode copy changes would land until mid next year. Until Prague, we'll say.
Right.
I actually have a thing about Xcode copy, which is that I think it's kind of a common pattern. Viper uses it for these blueprint contracts. It's ERC 5202, and it's used for these kind of factory contracts, which can read the init code from like a data contract, basically. And I think that's generally quite a good way of splitting code out. So I guess the pattern could be changed, but it might also be good to just have an S data copy kind of thing.
So one of the high-level goals that we're trying to achieve with this right now, until we formally abandon it, is to get rid of the ability to introspect code within code. You could think of it as basically the NX bit that the iPhone is subject to. You can't take data that has been processed by code and then execute that code. So as far as ext code copy going into the code segment, that is something we've had explicit requests from very high level people to not have functional, because it's going to have strong impacts on ZK systems. It's going to have strong impacts on cross compile systems. It's long term the direction we would want to go to ensure upgradability of EOF code. So yeah, that's one thing that's putting it at odds with some of the requests. However, as far as copying data and not code, and using a standard, like this FE71, that is something that I think is something that could be worked in. Maybe not necessarily in the first draft, but I think there is possibly room for it, and I think is less contentious than copying the init code itself. So that's kind of the table stakes going on. I don't have any strong yes or no's on that yet, but those are that's what we're trying to navigate around, what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Can you maybe explain a little more around, so I can understand better what, like, are we trying to ban code in contracts introspecting themselves, or what kind of code introspection are we trying to ban?
Code introspecting code, full stop, itself or other people. So we don't want code basically doing just-in-time compilation. We would like that the code that's going to be executed to be fixed at the time that the contract is loaded into the blockchain system, either through a transaction or through another piece of code. For example, we have the subcontainer codes that are put in there to support things like pool creation and Uniswap. And you can bring in code via the transaction via create4. You can bring in the code there in a separate container. What we don't want to have to support is the code that can enter transient storage, frame memory storage, or plain old contract storage, then becoming bytecode in the system. So that's, I think, the barrier that we want to make sure doesn't get crossed, so that when other systems change, how the code is represented, they don't then have to put in a cross compiler in their execution environments for these codes. They can compile the code, they can put the blocks at the transaction entry points, and they can do whatever work they need to do there, and not necessarily at the runtime of the EVM, of however they're executing the EVM and what's representing the runtime of the EVM.
So if I'm understanding correctly, basically we don't want to be generating code at runtime and deploying contracts from there, or running code that is dynamically generated.
Correct. Data is fine. That's much more easier to manage and conceptualize, and to deploy contracts and append data at the end. That's actually kind of necessary for some modern uses of the EVM. But as far as generating code at runtime, we want to get the bytecode out of all processing streams that are run during execution time that is not actually being executed.
Okay, I'll have to think about it. I think I have to jump off right now. Thanks, guys.
So I have a follow-up question about that, which would be, so just to recap as a very sort of simple example, it would be like, I have some contract, it has some bytecode in it. I call Xcode copy, and I would potentially take the bytecode that's there and then execute that within a new contract, and that's the behavior that you want to ban. Is that correct?
Basically, if you're taking the data, loading it to a memory stream, changing the memory, or creating it rather than a simple copy from another contract. So yeah, we don't want to have like if you want to create a contract that responds to two different calls, and you have logic that basically compiles it within the EVM and creates the code within the EVM and then deploys it. That's the sort of changes we don't want to have to support. Basically, jitting.
Okay.
But a common thing that we have to support is to take an existing contract and put in the data segment hard-coded constants like saying, my pool trades this token and this token, hard code those as data in the contract, seal that data, and put that out there. That's something we have to support, and I think something that the current spec does support.
Okay, so it's just like general, like, hey, here's some data that's non like code segment related. Yeah, can we copy that from somewhere? And then you can do something with it. But anything that would be sort of like an opcode or something that you need to like execute, you just wouldn't support that. And like, it doesn't make sense to have just a general, like, hey, don't do this because it's not supported type of thing. Like, don't hard code like gas numbers into your smart contract. It's better left as not a convention, but a hard restriction.
Right, and that's the point of the call to series, is that you can't limit gas, which is how a lot of these contracts got wedged, is they'd specify a small number of gas, we'd increase the cost of storage, and those contracts would be broken forever until we did EIP 2929 and 2930. We don't want to have to do that again. So if we change the gas schedule, the solution is and should always be send more gas, and things will start working again.
Right, but I guess the contracts got, yeah, I guess it's just because they were not following convention. So the approach here is to be a little bit more strict and to say like, hey, look, we're just going to lock this down. So now you just can't do it. And I guess the thing that you probably would need to understand more of the use cases would be to see some of these like minimal proxies. I think a lot of people use like a pattern with EIP 1167. And they're using Xcode copy in that context, which it seems like maybe Create 3 would do the right thing.
Yeah, you would have an encapsulated contract that you could then send. You wouldn't Xcode copy it. You would do your encapsulated contract. You would put in what you're proxying to in it, and then you would submit that, and the contract would reference its data section to do its jump. And because it's encapsulated in the contract, it can never change. So you get the immutable proxy.
Cool, cool. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments on the spec? Any testing related updates?
Yeah, I've been working on, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, I've been working on updating the test cases according to the mega spec. According to this specification, and yeah, there is currently a work in progress pull request in the Ethereum test repo, which contain these changes. The test has already been changed to the Bragg hard fork, and also it is also using the new proposed opcode. And I'm currently working on changing the tests to also support the containers sections. This is what I'm currently working on right now. So yeah, that's it for me.
Awesome. Thanks. Any other testing comments, updates? Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, it's just a comment to the earlier discussion regarding the code size stack verification. So Solidity, initially, when Daniel was implementing it, he ran into some similar problems. But then he actually figured out a way to use the code sections, which were efficient enough. And in the end, at least on the test suite the compiler has, he noticed savings in many cases. And there weren't, at that time at least, there weren't outliers in sense of like generating much larger code. We did discuss a number of other features which I think we agreed to have in the spec, and I think lately they have been added, but they may not have been implemented fully. And one of the important ones was the non-returning functions, where stack validation isn't. You don't need to validate the number of return items. But this feature was at least the source of most of the problems in Solidity because it has the error paths. They just end there like revert. And with this in place, all of that can be deduplicated. So I'm not sure, what are the cases in Viper, but it may be interesting to have like a discussion together with Solidity just to figure out, which are the real problems or bugs, and which maybe require some better understanding how to use it. And then lastly, we did in a number of other like feature discussions, including like tail jumps. I don't remember what was the conclusion of those, but we can probably dig up the comments from around January.
I think we lost Charles. But okay, yeah. They'll probably figure those things out as well at some point. Anything else people have on the agenda they wanted to discuss? Okay. I guess in that case, let's end it a little bit early. We'll have the next call again in 2 weeks. In the meantime, hopefully Charles will post his comments that he had on Discord or bump them on Discord, and we can just take a look at that offline. Thanks a lot, everyone. See you again in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.